Okay, anatomists, we are on video 10. This is muscles of the forearm and hand. So, the muscles that we're looking at today are brachioradialis, anconeus, pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and supinator. So these are deep muscles of the forearm, most of them. Brachioradialis is not deep. And so these are the deepish muscles of the forearm that aren't the flexors and extensors of the forearm, which will be on the next video. Okay, so let's take a look. So we're going to go through the muscles not in the order that I listed them. We're actually going to start today with pronator quadratus. So pronator quadratus is on page 167 in the book. Let's take a look at that muscle. So attachments for pronator quadratus are the anterior distal ulna and the anterior distal radius. So if we see here, this is the ulna and this is the radius. So pronator quadratus is down here. So the name pronator quadratus gives us, of course, information about the muscle. I'm going to draw it on myself as we're talking about it here. So the distal, so kind of, it's going to attach along here, and it's going to attach along here. We're going to see fibers kind of, can you see that okay? Fibers joining in between. So this muscle is deep, you know, I'm drawing it on my skin, of course, but it's deep to the muscles that, you can, if you can see this, you can see the tendons in my wrist. This muscle is deep to those tendons. This muscle is right down there at the bone. So what does pronator quadratus mean? Quadratus means four-sided. So it refers to the shape of the muscle, and pronator means it's a pronator, so that's a dead giveaway. So we know any muscle that does pronation or supination of the forearm has to attach to which bone? Do you remember? It's not the ulna, because with pronation and supination, the ulna stays put, more or less. It's the radius. So in this bone, the attachment at the ulna would be considered the origin. The attachment at the radius would be considered the insertion. So with a regular movement, a standard mover action, we're going to have these fibers that are going in this direction. They're going to shorten and pull that radius over the ulna. Okay? Oops, I think I was off the screen. Like that. Can you picture that? These fibers shortening, and we're going to pull that radius over for pronation. Okay, that's pronator quadratus. It does pronation. Okay, let's look at the next pronator here. We're going to look at pronator teres next. So pronator teres is on page 165. Pronator teres attaches, so it has a couple of heads, but don't worry too much about the couple of heads that it has. So it attaches, let me show you on the bones here, to the medial epicondyle of the humerus, so here, and the coronoid process of the ulna, so across here like this, is its origin or its proximal attachment, and then its insertion is the lateral radius, so it's going to kind of wrap over to the radius over here. Okay, so kind of like that. So if we draw that on, here's what that looks like. Let's see. So on a body, can you see this is my medial epicondyle, okay? Here's my whole elbow. Here's the medial epicondyle. So we're going to go from the medial epicondyle and the proximal. So again, this muscle is, you know, deep to some other things that are here. But from the medial epicondyle, and then it's also going to kind of pick up the coronoid process of the ulna and head to the lateral radius over here. Okay, so then it's going to attach to the radius here. Fibers are going to go in this direction. Okay, so this is pronator teres. So teres means that it's a rounded muscle. Pronator means, oh yeah, let's see, same as pronator quadratus. It means that it pronates. So, but we could have guessed that it pronates, right? Because it attaches to the radius here. That's its moving, it's the end that tends to move. And so it's going to be able to shorten these fibers, pull on the radius. See how it pulls on the radius? And then So as the radius comes around, we have pronation happening. Okay, so we have pronator quadratus and pronator teres doing pronation of the forearm. Pronator teres also crosses the elbow somewhat anteriorly, so it can also do elbow flexion. It's not a big mover in elbow flexion, but it can participate. So elbow flexion and pronation. Okay, so we have pronator quadratus, we have pronator teres. Let's look next at, let me think here, what's our next one? Let's do supinator, how about? So supinator is on page 169. Supinator is more on the lateral aspect, okay? So on here, so this is our elbow and our proximal radial ulnar joint. So here's our medial epicondyle where pronator teres was attaching. So our lateral epicondyle is over here, right there, right? So supinator attaches to the lateral epicondyle of the humerus and the proximal ulna, and then it attaches to the radius. So it attaches to specifically the proximal 1/3 of the posterior, lateral, and anterior sides. What we're going to see with, sorry, I have shouting kids running through the room. Okay, so let's take a look at where this muscle is. Supinator. Okay, lateral epicondyle of the humerus, so it's over here, and then it's going to attach, and lateral epicondyle of the humerus and the proximal ulna. So it's attaching to the humerus here and the ulna here. Okay, and then its insertion is on the radius, so it's going to go actually like. Can you see this? It's going to go like this, like that, more or less. Okay, so here are our fibers. So from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus to the kind of the midshaft of the radius. So, like this muscle is in a stretch position. If these fibers contract, it's going to pull the radius over into supination. Okay, so it's stretched like this, it's contracting like that, pulling over into supination. Okay, so pronator quadratus does pronation. Pronator teres does pronation and elbow flexion. Supinator does supination. Okay, we're stretching it like this, and here we're doing supination. Okay, so that's the first three. Let's look at Anconius, which is on page 163. Anconius. So Anconius is Greek for elbow, which is where this muscle is located. Let's take a look at Anconius. This is going to be a little hard to see and draw, but I think we can do it. So it attaches to the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, just like supinator there, and then it's going to go to the posterior proximal ulna. So it's kind of a sort of a triangle-shaped sort of muscle. Okay, so it's going to go kind of like, can you see me? Where are we? Hard to see. Like this, more or less. All right, can you see that guy? Okay, so what does it do? Elbow extension. Can you see here that I would be stretching these fibers, and here I'm contracting the fiber, so it does elbow extension. It's a little helper with elbow extension. So it attaches to the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, and it attaches to the ulna. So it doesn't do pronation or supination, because it attaches only to the ulna and to the humerus. It doesn't attach to the radius, but it does elbow extension. Very often it's Anconius that is whose fibers are inflamed when somebody has lateral epicondylitis. So it attaches there at that lateral epicondyle. right? That's anconeus. And what's our last one here? It is brachioradialis. So brachioradialis is the most superficial of these muscles. It's on page 157, which is why I left it for last, because it's going to go over some of these other ones that we already have drawn on here. Okay, so where does this guy attach? Let me go back to anconeus so you can, I don't know if I pointed it out on the bones. Anconeus is going to go from the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, which is here, to the proximal ulna here. So it spans right across there like that. Okay, so then if those fibers shorten, we're going to have elbow extension happening. Okay, all right, so on to brachioradialis. Brachioradialis, its name tells you where it attaches. So brachio refers to the upper arm, so the humerus, and radialis refers to the radius. So it is going to originate on the humerus and insert down here on the radius. So specifically the lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus. So if we're looking here at the elbow, at the distal end of the humerus, here's our medial epicondyle. Here are the two condyles, the trochlea, the capitulum. Here's our lateral epicondyle. The supracondylar ridge is this ridge right here, right above the lateral epicondyle. That's the lateral supracondylar ridge. So that's where brachioradialis begins. So that's the brachio part of it. The insertion down here at the radius is at the styloid process of the radius, which is this tip right here. Okay, so spanning from here all the way down to here. This muscle, I'll draw it on here. This muscle has a nickname. It is nicknamed, I'm just trying to find a color I haven't used yet here. It is called the handshake muscle, and I'll show you why here in a second. So let's find our lateral supracondylar ridge. So here's the lateral epicondyle. So just above that is going to be the lateral supracondylar ridge. And then the fibers are going to go down. This is a muscle that's superficial enough that I can find it and actually just draw that muscle. Okay, so it's going to go down, all the way down to the styloid process, more or less like that. Okay, and then fibers. So I'm, kind of covering up supinator here to draw this muscle, but that's how things go. They're kind of layered when it comes to muscles. It's a little bulkier. All right, so that's brachioradialis. Okay, and down here it's actually a little thinner. I made it kind of wide there, but okay, so what does this muscle do? So let's actually get it going here a little more, because it does do some elbow flexion. So it comes enough anterior here that that its fibers are in a position to be able to do elbow flexion, but that's not its strongest movement. The main thing it does is both pronation and supination of the forearm. So how can it be its own antagonist if it has fibers all going in the same direction like this, right? Because isn't it true on the other muscles we've looked at, if a muscle is its own antagonist, it has fibers going in different directions, and that's how it manages that task. So brachioradialis does it a little bit differently. So brachioradialis has a nickname, which is the handshake muscle. Okay, so if your hand is in position to do a handshake, it's kind of in this position halfway between supination and pronation. And so the function of brachioradialis is to put the forearm in that position, in that halfway position between pronation and supination. So if you're in pronation, it pulls you halfway to supination. If you're in supination, it pulls you halfway to pronation. Okay, so that's how it does a supination and pronation, both, even though the fibers all just go in one direction. Okay, so that's brachioradialis. It's the most superficial of those muscles. Actually, so here's mine. I still haven't made it big enough. Here's my brachioradialis. Okay, that's more where it is. All right. So it's more superficial and for sure the bulkiest muscle of the forearm. Okay, brachioradialis. So elbow flexion, but it's not crazy strong at elbow flexion, but it does do elbow flexion, which is something else that happens in a handshake. So that helps make it easy to remember what it does if you think of it as a handshake muscle. It does do elbow flexion, but it puts the hand in that position that's midway between flexion and extension. So, midway between pronation and supination. So it does both supination and pronation to get to that position. Okay, so those are the 5 muscles of this video. Let's actually go into the app and just take a look at layering so we can have a sense of how these muscles relate to the muscles that we're going to talk about next, which are the flexors and extensors of the forearm. Okay, here we are inside the app. So we want to look at these 5 muscles. Brachioradialis, anconeus, pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and supinator. So let's zoom in on the forearm. Okay, and add some muscles on. Okay, so if we just do our first layer of muscles, what muscle do we see here? Pronator quadratus, right? So there's pronator quadratus, pretty deep, right? Is all the way down there at the bones, and there's nothing else in town around that muscle. So pronator quadratus is very deep there. And what do we see over here? That's supinator, also pretty deep. So see how supinator kind of wraps around the radius. So it attaches at the lateral epicondyle and then kind of wraps around the radius there. So you can see with the fiber direction how it would be able to pull the radius around and create supination. Okay, so that's supinator right there. And we saw pronator quadratus right here. All right, let's add some more on and see what we get. We have, okay, anybody else show up here that we're talking about? I think no. We'll get to these in the next video. So, okay, so let's just say though, what are these muscles that are showing up here? These are the deep, this is the deep layer of the flexors of the forearm. Okay, and we'll name these muscles in the next video. And the deep layer, a couple of the deep layer of the extensors on the posterior side there. Okay, let's come back to the anterior side, add on another layer and see what else that we get. Here is more of the flexors are adding on here. And there's brachioradialis. So see, I'm going to take it off again. Now here it comes back again, brachioradialis. Oh, I should put the names on here, huh, guys, so you can see this. I just assume you know what muscle I'm looking at. Oops, sorry, that's extensor carpi radialis longus. Oh my gosh, I'm so wrong. Okay, so nothing new has popped up here that we need to look at just yet, I don't think. Let's put another layer on. And another layer. Okay, here, what's this guy? Oops, not you. You. There's pronator teres. See that one? Pronator teres. Okay, from the medial epicondyle and going down to the radius. Pronator teres there. In contrast to supinator, which, can we still see supinator? There's supinator. Oops, no. Get rid of that. There's supinator. Okay, so supinator, add some on. And pronator teres. Okay, did we miss anconeus? It's a little muscle. Whoops, come here. There's anconeus. Look at that tiny guy in there. But perfectly situated to do extension of the elbow, right? What else could it do there? It's got to do extension of the elbow. There's anconeus. Such a troublemaker, though, when it comes to lateral epicondylitis. But it's because it's one of these small muscles that's kind of like, you know, is trying to help out these bigger, stronger movers. And that's why it gets injured and irritated sometimes, because it's not as big and strong as some of the bigger movers. So there's anconeus. And we also have brachioradialis here. So there's brachioradialis, so going from the lateral supracondylar ridge of the humerus to the styloid process of the radius. Okay? Brachioradialis. Okay, so I think that's all of them of this from this video. We saw brachioradialis, we saw anconeus, we saw pronator teres, pronator quadratus, and supinator. Alrighty, so that wraps up video 10, folks. And so now moving on to video 11, the next thing we're going to look at are these flexors and extensors of the forearm that are, you know, so, I mean, I can't indicate the whole group here, but, you know, here we're getting kind of a look at the group of flexors anyway. And they're, you know, they're layers of them. I'm taking some layers off and we're seeing these layers. But anyway, so flexors of the forearm are, you know, deep to some of these 5 and on the same level as some of these 5 that we just looked at. But anyway, that's video 11. Coming up next is flexors and extensors of the forearm. So get coloring books ready for video 11, and I'll see you then.